Captain Forrest here. Now before I start this video, I want to give a huge shout out to the HQ squad and the Crusaders. Massive shouts to Nyotic and Slick. They were the ones that found some pretty interesting arguments and pretty interesting cosmology upgrades for DC as a whole. Another shout out to Korin O'Keefe. He's also the driving force in my videos. Huge special shout outs to Korin O'Keefe. He also discovered some very good arguments for some of the DC cosmology as well, and some of the higher up verses, especially Leviathan of Stories. Some really good stuff. I will go into detail, and I will also talk about in this video of how powerful Dr. Manhattan really is, especially with the newfound upgrades, especially with some of the placements in the cosmology and the upgrades for some of the realms. I will go into detail and I'll explain it in here. And lastly, another shouts to Comics Fan. This is just a kind of an honorable mention, you know, shouts to him. He's also cool. He also gives some pretty interesting takes on DC too. But anyway, today I'm going to be power scaling Dr. Manhattan. I'm going to go ahead and go over the naked blue dude himself and talk about what he brings to the table. So Dr. Manhattan is feared by Mr. Mixie, who claims that Manhattan's abilities are far superior to his own. Now this is impressive due to Mixie and the 5th dimension placement in the cosmology, but before that, let's work our way up. So to start things off, we have the bleed being on the same level as or even above the time stream. This is showcased by how the monitors, when inside the time stream, they state that the bleed is something they can't see or control. This means that even beings that exist on the same level as the time stream is actually below the bleed. Now for why this is impressive is that we have consistent statements for the time stream being as beyond time and space, and it was also stated as being unaffected by the confines of time and dimensions. Far beyond the bleed is the sphere of the gods. You may be wondering, how far beyond the bleed is it? Now in my previous videos, I explained to you all that the sphere of the gods is conceptually beyond the bleed, as it's been described as a platonic archetypal world, the great realm of archetypal powers and intelligences. We've established this as being in the outerversal ballpark before, and due to conceptually transcending a high hyperversal structure, aka the bleed. However, applying the outerversal scaling that was presented for the bleed, the sphere of the gods skyrockets up to high outerversal. But there's more to this. That's actually the lowest scaling. That's like some safe scaling if you want to go by it. That's like the normal standard scaling you'd give, like the typical hierarchy for DC. But what if I told you the godsphere is even greater than high outerversal? Well folks, watch and learn as I take the DC cosmology to new heights. There is more information as regards to the godsphere. The Spectre states that there are different levels of heaven. When he was explaining to a dead soul what heaven was, he notes that his existence on Earth and universe is a dream. Once he takes this soul to the gates of heaven, he tells him that every higher heaven is a higher level or a more fundamental dream than the lower heaven. Essentially, we know the lowest heaven is at least conceptually beyond everything below it, and since the sphere refers to both the mortal plane and the heavens as dreams, we can say that every higher dream or heaven would be a conceptual gap. Another thing that would support the conceptual gap is that dreams in DC have been repeatedly stated to be archetypal, and Dream of the Endless himself has stated a human's dream allows you to enter the dreaming, another realm in the godsphere. The reason for why heaven would be extraversal is attributed by these points. When the Phantom Stranger traveled through heaven to find newly departed souls that went to heaven, he describes himself traveling through the entirety of heaven, getting to the very end. He talks about how he goes through the different levels of heaven and the different levels of how far each soul has progressed through its development cycle. The part that gives the high outer part is when the Phantom Stranger notes that some have left the illusion of flesh and individual identity behind. This is important because in the past, the Phantom Stranger stated that angels are unfettered by the base demands of flesh when he was talking to beings that had 3-dimensional bodies, which means that the gap between seeing these things would be a conceptual gap or an outer gap if you use that term. This would effectively prove high outerversal. To prove that this process repeats itself infinitely, we would have to look at the Phantom Stranger's scan again. He walks through to the end of heaven, and when he gets to the end, he finds the newly departed souls he was searching for, which means that the baseline heaven would scale above everything I mentioned, and then it would start its own development cycle and have the same type of conceptual to outer gap. Zoriel even mentions how these souls would then depart to even deeper levels of heaven, showing that not only are they going to get more developed, but that heaven is that big to contain this all. Then a new heaven would form from a soul that sits on top of that, and this would repeat infinitely, meaning that this gets to extraversal. Very impressive. Another thing that supports 1S heaven and 1S godsphere in general is because hell is a realm that is the same size as heaven. It's even stated that there are many hells as there are souls in creation. Hell is stated to be a metaphysical realm, meaning that each hell in the hierarchy is a higher level of metaphysics, further supporting the conceptual gaps of each layer in heaven. Something physical can't reach something metaphysical, and this is because the first level of metaphysics is beyond the concepts of space, time, and dimensions, and each hell would be a higher level of metaphysics. Now, after the sphere of the gods, we have Limbo, which is at least infinitely to inaccessibly beyond the sphere of the gods, followed by the monitor sphere. The monitor sphere is an archetypal realm and fundamental world where everything is more profound and absolute, and was described as a realm of nothingness beyond the multiverse, the bleed, the sphere of the gods, and even Limbo, which means it's conceptually beyond everything I previously mentioned. The source wall is stated to be beyond infinity. The source wall is the edge of creation. The new gods have spent a long time trying to figure out the secrets of the source, but could never get past the source wall. And since the new gods have access to things like boom tubes, which can make a human the same size as a new god, that means boom tubes can allow you to go to the realms conceptually above you, but they couldn't figure out a way to get past the source wall, which means they can't boom tube themselves past the source wall, and therefore conceptual layers can't reach the source wall. During Green Lantern Godhead, it was shown repeatedly that new gods can boom tube themselves past the monitor sphere, which is conceptually beyond the god sphere. Now, the fifth dimension. There is an interesting statement by Hourman, who notes to Shazam, who is also extraversal, stating that the creatures in the fifth dimension and their abilities are far beyond Hourman's, as Hourman's are beyond Shazam's. This is very impressive and a really good statement, demonstrating an extraversal difference of the fifth dimension and those with the power of it in comparison to others below it. As showcased in previous videos, all of creation exists outside the fourth dimension. Then we have the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension is described as existing everywhere, and that it's outside of time, which is the name of the fourth dimension. Now, the fifth dimension is described as a higher plane of existence that's more complex than the lower forms. Mixie also tells us that beings like him couldn't exist in a higher dimension, showcasing how beings from lower dimensions can't exist in higher ones. This would make the fifth dimension one inaccessible transcendence above the monitor sphere. Mr. Mixie in particular has shown himself to scale directly to the fifth dimension, destroying it without any effort in World's Funniest. This makes sense when you consider that Mr. Mixie is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, fifth dimensional imp. Even with all this power, Mixie is still far inferior to Dr. Manhattan. However, the phenomenal power of Dr. Manhattan doesn't end here, folks. Now, if you thought him scaling above Mixie is impressive, then you haven't seen anything yet. In the past, Dr. Manhattan tried mending the rifts left from the different crises that had gone down over the years. The energy was collected by the quintessence and given to Wonder Woman. When she had this power, she was not only able to fight Perpetua, but even to defeat her. Was the reason she failed was because Wonder Woman hesitated. And once Perpetua regained her power, she casually had Anti-Monitor take control over the Ultra Monitor, while she was also giving him his anti-life back. Perpetua was even stated as 100 times more powerful than any version of Barbatos, Barbatos being someone who's able to strike down the World Forger. World Forger on his own being from the sixth dimension, which Mixie notes that he himself would be unable to survive existing in. Perpetua is the mother of the multiverse, which comprises of infinite timelines and fourth dimensional layers of existence, that the highest being, sixth dimension, A realm that isn't just beyond the 5th dimension, no, it's beyond the source wall itself. And to beings in the 6th dimension, all of existence is like a ball that they can easily grab hold of. Okay, so that's going to round up Dr. Manhattan's stats. Now, let's find out what Dr. Manhattan brings to the table in terms of abilities and versatility. As we all know, Dr. Manhattan is capable of manipulating matter. Heck, he can manipulate it on a micro quantum level. An example of this is when Dr. Manhattan killed Roscoff by disassembling his entire atomic structure. He can disassemble objects with just his mere thoughts alone. We've seen Manhattan use absorption tactics. This is shown when he absorbed energy from the Green Lantern's ring and absorbed magical attacks. Wally West states that John is full of connective energy, which is essentially a form of positive cosmic energy, opposite in nature to the negative crisis energy wielded by beings like Perpetua. Oh, remember what I mentioned previously at the start of Manhattan's AP scaling? You know, the part where Mr. Mixie states that Dr. Manhattan's abilities are far superior to his own. This is good for Manhattan, as it adds on more versatility to his arsenal. Versatility that is far superior to the versatile 5D imp. You may be wondering, what does Mixie have? Well, let's find out, folks. Mr. Mixie has been shown to unmake the art and plot. Mixie was able to turn Superman into a cartoon and gave Superman cartoon physics. Emperor Joker, who has Mixie's powers, made a few superheroes into his own image by changing what their powers were. Something else to keep in mind, reassembling himself was the first thing that Dr. Manhattan learned. He has walked on the surface of the sun and experienced events that would be far too fast for humans to comprehend. Dr. Manhattan experiences firsthand the reboots in DC's continuity, and yet he remains unaffected. And additionally, John exists in every timeline simultaneously. This essentially means that Dr. Manhattan has a causality type 1 and 3. Type 1, time paradox immunity. Characters with this type of acausality are rendered immune to changes in the past and standard temporal paradoxes, but remain just as vulnerable in the present and can be affected by normal causality manipulation and similar abilities. And type 3, temporal permanence. Characters with this type of acausality are incredibly difficult to kill, as other versions of themselves from other points in time and or from other universes can survive the destruction of the original and act in their place. This also grants them immunity to changes in the past. And lastly, John is able to look into the future. So overall, Dr. Manhattan is very powerful. The DC cosmology is very powerful and big and pretty huge. Easily, Dr. Manhattan, from the lowest ends of High Altiversal Plus, Boundless, if not Boundless Plus if you want to apply layers, Extraversal, hell even beyond baseline Extraversal, easily has some 1S transcendences into the tier, pretty good. Full on transcendences, by the way. So he's got some good layers into the 1S tier, aka Extraversal. So Dr. Manhattan is very powerful. Now in terms of speed, he should naturally easily have immeasurable to irrelevant speed. There's just no objections to it. Your boy's fast, and he's shown to massacre a lot of characters who have their own impressive speed showings. So that's going to round up the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Huge shouts to the team. And we all put a lot of effort into this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed. But yes, it's been real. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.